that's all from me. So welcome, Patrick. Thank you for being here tonight.
Oh, Anna, thanks so much for opening the workshop. I'm Patrick Byers. I'm a horticulture field specialist at University of Missouri Extension, and I'm based in Webster County. And I've worked for, over 30 years now, serving Missouri's farmers and helping farmers with sustainability and profitability. And the subject of tonight's workshop, which is blueberry production, is a subject that's very close to my heart. And in fact, I began my career many years ago as an undergraduate student. I worked a summer job at the State Fruit Experiment Station, Mountain Grove, and I was put on a crew that worked in blueberries, and I just got enthralled with blueberries. First of all, of course, they taste great. And, having a chance to work with a crop that tastes great is always an exciting thing, but also it's a challenging crop. And at that time, this was still relatively early in the development of Missouri's blueberry industry. And so I had a chance to be involved in some of the early work in developing blueberries as a commercial crop for our farmers here in Missouri. Went on to graduate school, and my graduate master's project was focused on Highbush blueberry irrigation, and then various jobs after graduate school, but an emphasis on blueberries throughout my career. So I'm so excited to be talking about blueberries tonight. Now, what we have is some prepared material on slides, and we'll go through that material. I have several videos to share with you, including a fairly in-depth video on blueberry pruning. There's always lots of questions about how to prune blueberries. And so a colleague of mine from the University of Illinois and I put together this video for blueberry growers. So we'll take a look at that. As Anna mentioned, we'll tackle questions throughout the evening. If you have questions, enter them into the Q&A, and Anna will prompt me when questions come up. So I think without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, Anna, can we see the presentation?
We can see it. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Well, blueberries. Why would a person consider growing blueberries? Well, for no other reason than they taste absolutely wonderful. The crop has a strong potential for a successful commercial production in Missouri, and it's been consistently profitable for those farmers who have tackled blueberries over the years. We're seeing an expansion in blueberry production in Missouri, and with the development of new cultivars that are better adapted to our growing environment, I think that we'll continue to see blueberries expand as a profit center for Missouri farmers. And so what we'll talk about tonight, again, is all aspects of blueberry production with a commercial bent. I've also sprinkled in some information of interest to home blueberry growers as well, because we may have some of those folks in our audience too. As Anna mentioned, this is a partnership with Springfield Community Gardens, and Springfield Community Gardens has a vision of a community where everyone has access to healthy local food. If you're a beginning farmer, if you're considering farming as a vocation, reach out to Springfield Community Gardens. We have a very innovative farmer incubator program, and we'd love to share with you more information on how you can get involved in the programs with Springfield Community Gardens. Our workshop is also part of a larger series sponsored by USDA. And the USDA is a federal agency whose mission is to serve farmers of all scale. And this includes small and beginning farmers. So for more information about USDA programs that serve farmers, reach out to your local Farm Services Agency office. There's one in every county. Check out the resources available from the Natural Resources Conservation Service, the Risk Management Agency, and the Rural Development Agency. And all of this information is summarized on the farmers.gov resources website. And again, I work for University of Missouri. I'm also a farmer, and I'm also a guy who eats a lot of blueberries. So I guess maybe that qualifies me as your speaker tonight. Here's what we're going to do tonight. First of all, we'll have an introduction to blueberries. Then we'll talk a bit about blueberry types and cultivars of the different types. We'll spend most of our time talking about growing blueberries. We'll spend a bit of time on blueberry problems, and we'll talk about harvesting and enjoying blueberries. So blueberries are an all-American, all-North American crop, and the important commercial types of blueberries are all native to North America. And not only are they native to North America, obviously, but they've been an important food source for birds and animals such as bears, raccoons, possums, and other animals. They've also been an important food source for Native Americans for centuries. And as European settlers arrived, they too recognized the resource that was in our native blueberries. And you can find many mentions of harvesting blueberries among the histories and the chronicles of the early European settlers when they arrived in North America. Missouri has native blueberries. This is kind of a little known fact, but we have 3 species of native blueberries found in Missouri. 2 of these are lowbush blueberries, as we see in this picture here. The 3rd species is called the farkleberry, and it's actually a shrub to a small tree. And they can be found across southern Missouri. These 3 types, typically you're going to find wild blueberries on sites that are shady and that have acidic soils. As I'm out foraging for wild plants in blueberry season, I typically find blueberries on north-facing slopes. Now, this lower picture is a bit unusual because there's lots of competition to those ripe berries, and it's very seldom that I find this much fruit on a wild blueberry. But in fact, look at that handful of wild blueberries. This was, as I mentioned, an unusual occurrence. It was a planting of a patch of wild blueberries near Seymour, and I was so excited to find them. Now, yes, we have native blueberries, but we also have commercial blueberries. And the story of the origin of the commercial blueberry industry in the United States is very interesting. And it really points out the importance of collaboration between, yes, universities and federal agencies, but also private individuals. And I really want to give a shout out to Miss Elizabeth White. Elizabeth White was a farmer in New Jersey. She had a sizable acreage that included some areas where native blueberries grew. And she would send people out to harvest these blueberries, and she would sell wild harvested blueberries. Well, she got to looking at the plants on her farm, and she noticed that some of these plants had larger berries than other plants. And in fact, she instructed her pickers to tie ribbons to those bushes that had larger berries so that they could go back and harvest the fruit from those berries in coming years. Well, Elizabeth White heard about Dr. F.V. Colville, who was a plant breeder and a researcher with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And all of this took place back in the early years of the previous century, in the 20th century. Well, she heard about Dr. Colville's interest in blueberries. She reached out to him and mentioned that she had a collection of large fruited blueberries. And Dr. Colville, of course, was very excited. And the 2 of them spent time on Elizabeth's farm looking at these plants. And in fact, they dug up and transplanted the most promising plants to Beltsville, Maryland, which is where the Blueberry Development Program was located. Under the guidance of Dr. Colville, breeding began with these blueberries. And some of the blueberries that we grow today were the result of crosses in the plants that Elizabeth White identified. And in fact, Dr. Colville was very generous in his acknowledgement of Elizabeth White's contribution over the years. And all of this work began in 1911. And by 1916, we began to see the planting of these improved blueberries. And now we have a very large blueberry production industry in North America, again, based upon the contributions of Elizabeth White and Dr. F.V. Colville. Now let's talk a bit about blueberry types and cultivars. And there are literally hundreds of blueberry cultivars, but you can place all of these cultivars into distinct groups. And we'll talk about those groups here in a moment. This is a picture of blueberries that were included in a cultivar trial at the State Fruit Experiment Station in Mountain Grove. You can see lots of diversity in berry size and their color and the consistency of size among the berries within each of the boxes. So lots of interesting blueberry cultivars out there. So again, among the blueberry types, we have northern Highbush blueberries and southern Highbush blueberries. And these are the 2 types that are the backbone of blueberry production in Missouri. We'll talk more about these here in a moment. There's also half-high blueberries. And if you're interested in growing blueberries in a container, half-high blueberries would be good ones to consider. We have some interesting ornamental blueberries. In fact, we have blueberries that have pink berries. We have lowbush blueberries. Again, our native blueberries in Missouri are lowbush blueberries. We typically don't grow lowbush blueberries as a crop here in Missouri, but at least in theory, they could be grown. And then we have a group called rabbit-eye blueberries, which are blueberries grown in the deep south. And quite frankly, they lack hardiness and are not the best type to consider for Missouri. So again, here in Missouri, we focus on northern Highbush blueberries and southern Highbush blueberries. So northern Highbush blueberries, they're hardy, they're adapted to Missouri. These are the types of blueberries that were the foundation of our industry here in Missouri, and still very important types. And these include cultivars here that are listed in order of ripening: Duke, Blue Ray, Blue Crop, Coville, Late Blue, and Elliott. Then again, there are many others that could be considered within the northern Highbush group. Southern Highbush blueberries. These types of blueberries were developed by hybridizing northern Highbush blueberries with native blueberries found in the southeastern US. And the goal was to develop blueberries that would grow well on mineral soils. That's, one of the negatives about northern Highbush blueberries is they don't really do as well on mineral soils. And here in Missouri, of course, we have mineral soils as much of the southern part of the US. But with the contribution of these native southeastern species, we now have a group of blueberries, the southern Highbush blueberries, that grow well on mineral soils. Now, because they have these southern species incorporated into them, there are some concerns about winter hardiness with some of the southern Highbush blueberries. But a select group are hardy enough to grow here in Missouri, and these include Legacy, as we see here in this picture. Half-high blueberries. These are lower statured blueberries, typically about 2 to 3 feet tall. Ideal for containers. Here's an example. This is Top Hat growing in a 5-gallon container. Other cultivars to consider would be Northland and North Sky. And again, excellent for growing in containers. These can be grown as a harvested crop here in Missouri as a field crop, but typically they're not as productive as northern Highbush blueberries or southern Highbush blueberries on a per acre basis. I mentioned ornamental blueberries. Here's pink lemonade. It doesn't have blueberries at all. It has pink berries. But they taste like blueberries and they have the aroma of blueberries. They're just kind of a novel type of plant. And then we have a cultivar called Jelly Bean, which has a very interesting flavor to the berries. It's somewhat of a half-high berry, but again, interesting to grow as a container grown blueberry. Okay, do we have any questions at this point, Anna?
No questions yet.
Okay, very good. Again, I would encourage everyone, if you have questions, to please enter them into the Q&A box. All right, now, when we think about growing blueberries, certainly we can grow them as a home fruit crop. We can grow them as part of the home fruit planting, but there's a lot of interest in commercial production of blueberries. And I'd like to mention a very interesting tool developed at the university called the Missouri Ag Intel tool. And I'd like to take just a moment to share with you some of the aspects of this tool. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my sharing here. And we will go to the Ag Intel tool. I say that if I can find it here. Hold on just a moment. Okay, I apologize for the thing. Here we go. Okay, Anna, can we see the Ag Intel tool now?
We can see it. Yeah.
Okay, very good. So the Ag Intel tool is an interactive tool developed by the University of Missouri, and it helps guide farmers through the process of determining which crops to grow on their farm. And basically, it's a click and follow through the process. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I did want to show you the features. The first one is what should I grow? And we click on that, and we can see it brings up the decision tool, and we have a lot of different crops to consider, but our focus tonight is on blueberries. So we click on blueberries, and there are a series of questions that you ask yourself, first of all, of course, are you able to wait 3 years to harvest your first crop? If the answer is yes, that's good. Are the soils that you plant acidic? Are you willing to add drip irrigation for the addition of appropriate fertilizers to make the soil acidic? Let's say yes. Do you already have an identified market, or are you willing to direct market the crop? Let's say yes. Number 4, if necessary, do you have appropriate post-harvest storage? Are you able to transport the crop? Let's say that we don't have, but we're going to, perhaps in the future. Are you willing to actively scout for diseases and insects? Let's hope the answer is yes. We calculate the score, and it looks like we have a score above 65, which is an indication that this is a crop that we might want to consider. Now, the next step is to look at the crop suitability maps. So let's go back to that. We click on that, and we take a look at Missouri. And we can notice by the differing shades of green that some parts of the state are more suitable than other parts for growing blueberries. If you have a dark color, that's an unsuitable area, and a dark green color is highly suitable. I live in Webster County, so let's click on Webster County and take a look and see what we have. And in fact, let's enter my address. And we can notice that that particular address, we have the green here that suggests suitable. I'll adjust transparency a bit. And my farm is located right in this area here. So the Ag Intel tool is telling us that this is a site that would definitely be suitable for blueberry production. So that's how the suitability maps work. We also have some other parts of this tool that I'm not going to get into, but there's a part of the tool where you can assess marketing opportunities, where you can look at the farmers markets that are within 10 miles, 30 miles, or 50 miles of your farm. You can also look for other people growing blueberries in your area. You can assess your management capabilities, which can be a very important part of success. And then, of course, there's a resource guide here as well. So again, a very useful tool. I encourage anyone on the call who is considering commercial scale production of blueberries to work through the Ag Intel tool for more information. Okay, let's get back to okay, Anna, am I still on?
You are, yeah.
Okay, I'm having trouble finding my controls. Oh, there we go. Okay, sorry, folks. I'm still, even though I've been working with Zoom very intimately for over 1.5 years now, sometimes it still stymies me.
Feels like there's always more to learn with it.
There's always more to learn. Okay. All right, are we back to the presentation?
We're back.
Okay. Well, again, I encourage you to consider using the Ag Intel tool. Okay, now let's talk about choosing a good site to grow blueberries. Blueberries are full sun plants, so try to find a spot that is full sun that has at least 8 to 10 hours of sun during the summer. Choose a site that has a well-drained soil, or be prepared to modify the soil to make it well-drained. Blueberries will not grow well on poorly drained sites. Blueberries are not very competitive against plants with competitive root systems. This is certainly the case with trees. They're also sensitive to juglone, which walnut trees release from their roots. So don't plant blueberries near walnut trees. And plant them near a water source, because you will need to water blueberries. It's just part of growing blueberries successfully here in Missouri. Now, a good blueberry soil is acidic, has adequate organic matter, and is well drained. Many of our soils here in Missouri, unfortunately, fall short in one or more of these characteristics. So we'd like to have a pH of 4.8 to 5.2, an organic matter content of least 3%. More is better, and the soil must be well drained. Now, to help with the process of figuring out if your soil is suitable, a soil test is highly recommended. Now, the information that your soil test will give you will include the pH. Again, 4.8 to 5.2 on a water test would be ideal in your soil test report. The calcium level below 2,000 pounds per acre is going to be very helpful, and a cation exchange capacity below 18. So again, these are pieces of data, pieces of information that the soil test report will deliver to you. Now, soil fertility, not as important because you can modify that in a straightforward fashion, but a good soil for blueberries will have at least 30 pounds per acre of phosphorus and at least 150 pounds per acre of potassium. Let's take a look at 3 soil test reports and figure out if they're suitable for blueberries. And we'll start with the top test. We'll notice that it has a fairly high pH, 7.1. It has a high level of calcium, over 6,000 pounds per acre. And it's got a high CEC. This is not a particularly good site for blueberries. And in fact, if a farmer asked about the suitability of this site for blueberries, it would be best not to plant blueberries on this site. Other crops, yes, crops like strawberries or blackberries, but this is not a good blueberry site. The middle test, a pH of 6.4. Again, an adequate organic matter content of 5.8. Calcium level of 3,937, so it sits above 2,000, but still not too high, and a CEC of 12.3. This is a site that with modification could be made suitable for blueberry production, but again, it's going to require some modification. The lowest test, pH of 4.6, that's definitely between, at least, it's actually below 4.8 to 5.2, so that's certainly suitable. An organic matter content of 3.3. So again, we can certainly work with that. Calcium level below 2,000 pounds per acre and a CEC below 12. So the third report is certainly a report that would be suitable for blueberries as it is in its native state. Now, I will say that most soil test reports will come back closer to the middle test report, and most soils will require some modification to make them suitable for blueberries. Now, how can we modify soil pH? Because frequently this is the issue that we have to address with making a site suitable for blueberries. Well, again, start with the soil test. You want an accurate pH measurement. At this point, I'll mention that many of the handheld, inexpensive pH meters that are available just don't deliver an accurate enough measurement to base a decision from the standpoint of modifying soil pH. So the cost of submitting a soil test to a university lab or a private lab that is set up for soil testing is certainly worth every penny. Now, to modify the soil pH, typically the way it's done is through the use of elemental sulfur at least 6 months in advance of planting. Iron sulfate can also be used, but that's considerably more expensive than elemental sulfur. And again, for a commercial planting, modify the soil pH and then test the soil again in 6 months to make sure that the soil pH is where you need it to be. Now, what about organic matter modification? Well, there are a number of things we can do here. Using green manures and cover crops during the year to a year and a half before planting can be very helpful. Adding organic matter additions before planting, such as 2 to 3 inches of plant-based compost that is worked into the soil, is helpful. Using moist peat moss at planting time is a standard practice here in Missouri. 1 to 2 gallons of moist peat moss mixed into the soil that's placed back around the roots of the plant. And then maintaining an organic mulch after planting is very helpful as well. Now, what about drainage? We mentioned soil pH, we mentioned organic matter. Now we have to deal with drainage. If there's issues with soil drainage, this is difficult to correct without going through some sort of site modification. On a smaller scale, raised beds, as we see in this picture on the left, work beautifully for blueberries. They just really thrive in raised beds. On a commercial sized scale, we typically look at berms. And here is a planting of blueberries planted on a berm. And a typical blueberry berm will be about 3 to 4 feet wide and about 18 inches high. And then this berm is raised in advance of planting. It's allowed a given time to settle, and then the blueberries are planted into the berm. We'll talk about mulches here in a moment, but again, notice the organic mulch that this farmer is maintaining over the row of blueberries grown on this berm. Now, what about containers and raised beds? Again, particularly in the home garden, oftentimes a key to success with blueberries is creating a growing environment that is favorable for the plants. So a good growing media should be well drained, acidic, and high in organic matter, just as it should be in a blueberry field. And a good mix for blueberries in a container would be about 1/3 quarter-inch bark, 1/3 peat moss, and 1/3 azalea mix or acid plant mix potting soil. And then put about a small handful of sulfur per plant into the media mixed into the soil. Notice the size of the pot. This particular plant is growing in a whiskey barrel. Blueberries do well in 15 to 20 gallon pots or containers. Make sure that the containers are well drained, and this can be an excellent way to grow blueberries on a small scale. Now, let's talk about planting blueberries. And of course, this is a very exciting time. It's important to source your blueberry plants well in advance of when you actually plan to plant. So source your plants at least 6 months out. If you know you're going to plant blueberries, order them a year in advance. Blueberries are available in 1, 2, or 3-year age plants. And typically the type of plant that is most commonly grown is a 2-year plant. This is a plant that is moderate in cost. It's not as expensive as a 3-year plant. It's 1-year plants. If we look at the upper picture, the 1-year plant is on the left. These tend to be small, and oftentimes there's mortality when these are planted directly into the field. You can certainly purchase 1-year plants, pot them into pots, and grow them for a year. Perhaps you might save some money, but typically in most situations, planting a 2-year plant is the best way to do it. This lower plant in the pot, this is a 1-gallon plant, that's a 2-year plant. And that's an ideal size in which to plant blueberries. Spacing, blueberries typically are spaced 10 to 12 feet between rows and about 3 to 4 feet between plants. Planting time, blueberries can be planted in the spring. Ideal planting time in the spring would be March or April, or they can be planted in the fall, late October and early November. Either times will work well. Now, if you're planting container grown plants, you have a wider window in which to plant. In fact, you could plant later in the spring or earlier in the fall with container grown plants. Make sure that you plant at the proper depth. If you plant blueberry plants too deep, they may die. If you plant them too shallow, they may die. So look at this picture here and notice a changing color on the stem of that blueberry that I'm pointing at. And that is the level at which that plant was growing in the nursery. And that's the same level at which you want to plant it in the blueberry field. Where the color changes, that should be right at the soil surface. Make sure that you incorporate moist peat moss into the planting hole as we discussed earlier. Okay, you've raised a berm, you've planted your blueberries, now what? Now it's time to mulch. Lots of benefits from mulching. It moderates soil temperature and soil water. It helps control weeds. It contributes organic matter as it decomposes. Mulching is widely used for blueberries here in Missouri. Organic mulches are frequently used, as we see here. This is a mixture of bark chips and finer pieces of wood. That works great with organic mulches. They should be replenished regularly. We are seeing interest in using weed barrier fabrics as mulches here in Missouri. That too can be used. You don't see the benefits of organic mulches, but certainly weed barrier fabrics are very effective at managing weeds. And weeds are a big concern with blueberries. Water and irrigation. Blueberries will die during droughts. And it's just a fact of life here in the Ozarks that we're never more than 7 days from a drought. So be prepared to irrigate your blueberries. Irrigation, quite frankly, is critical. This picture shows a drip or trickle irrigation line. This particular type of line has emitters that are molded into the line at 18 or 24-inch intervals. And those spacings work great for blueberries. Soaker hoses on a small scale can be used, but for commercial scale plantings, trickle or drip irrigation is what is used. Lots of discussion today whether 1 or 2 lines should be used. The consensus seems to be developing that 2 lines work great for blueberries. Blueberries have a shallow root system, and having 2 lines, you have a better distribution of water over the profile of the soil where the blueberry roots are found without losing water too deeply in the soil. So having 2 lines in place and irrigating using what's called pulse irrigation is a very effective way to irrigate blueberries. With pulse irrigation, they're irrigated 3 to 4 times per week for a long enough interval to moisten the upper 8 to 10 inches of the soil. Now, again, as I mentioned, how often to water, you certainly want to start irrigating within 7 days of the last soaking rain. Blueberries need at least 1.5 to 2 inches of water per week. And you need to be watering every few days until it rains again. Best time to water is in the morning. And there are types of instruments that you can use to help schedule irrigation based upon soil moisture levels. For more information on that, please reach out and I'd be happy to share information on irrigation scheduling. Now, some thoughts on fertilizing your blueberries. So blueberries are like other plants. They have an annual demand for nutrients such as nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and the micronutrients. But we tend to schedule fertilization or base our rates on nitrogen. And we typically use an acid-forming fertilizer to supply nitrogen. Ammonium sulfate is an excellent source of nitrogen for blueberries. And not only is this an acid-forming form, it also provides fertile nitrogen in the ammonium form, which is the form that blueberries can readily take up. As far as rates, new plants typically 0.3 to 0.4 ounces per plant in the establishment year. Now, for the second and succeeding years, the blueberries need about 0.3 ounces per plant per application. And this is applied at bloom, 6 weeks post-bloom and 12 weeks post-bloom. So we want to spread this application out. Now, for mature blueberry plants, they require somewhere around 60 to 120 pounds of actual nitrogen per acre. And a good way to fertilize blueberries is through fertigation, where liquid forms of nutrients are injected into the irrigation line. And then the nutrients are delivered through the irrigation line. Plants should be fertigated weekly. And it's fairly straightforward to calculate how much nutrient to supply on a weekly basis to a mature planting. Now, how do we know if we're doing a good job with our fertility program? Well, the starting point, of course, is a periodic soil test just to get a feel for what the soil pH is. And I should mention at this point that the availability of a number of nutrients is directly dependent upon soil pH for blueberries. If the pH is too high or too low, these nutrients, although they may be present in the soil, are not present in a form that a blueberry plant can take up. So with this in mind, it's a good practice to monitor the soil pH every year. But really, if you want a clear picture of the nutrients that are within the plant, the answer is to do an annual foliar test. So let's watch a quick video that talks about how to collect and submit a foliar test from blueberries.
Patrick, we have a question.
Yes, what is the question?
Owen asks, how far away from the base of a blueberry plant should you acidify your soil?
So you should acidify the soil throughout the area where the blueberry roots may be found. Typically, acidification is done before planting. So yes, acidify the entire area and then plant the blueberries into that acidified soil. Are there any other questions?
Oh, that's our only question.
Okay. Okay, can we see the video here? I'll start it up.
We can see it.
Okay. Sit down, start.
With Highbush blueberry, foliar samples for routine maintenance of fertility management programs are collected 2 to 3 weeks after the end of harvest. So here in Missouri, that's typically in mid to late July. Make sure that the foliar sample represents the unit of interest. For example, if a planting has different blocks, sample each block separately. If there's more than one cultivar in a planting, sample each cultivar separately. The portion of the plant that is selected for a foliar test varies with the type of fruit. For example, with grapes, we select petioles. In the case of strawberries, we select a trifoliate leaf. In the case of blueberries, we select entire leaves. And we are selecting these leaves from current season's growth, And the leaves that we select will be mid-shoot leaves, so somewhere in this part of the shoot is where we'll collect the foliar sample. It's important that the leaves be healthy, and for example, looking at this sample here, this would be a good leaf to collect. The foliar test is going to include a number of leaves because it has to adequately represent the unit of interest. So you'll want to scatter your sample collection across the block or the cultivar and make sure that you collect at least 75 to 100 leaves. As you collect the foliar sample, place the leaves into a paper bag. A paper bag is better than a plastic bag because the leaves inside don't heat up as they would in a plastic bag, and they can lose quality by that happening. And then be sure to label each bag as you collect the sample so that you remember what you've collected. In this case, it's Blu-ray, Block 1, and today is July 20th, 2020. The foliar sample is generally dried before being submitted to an analytical laboratory. So bring your sample in, pour the leaves out on a clean plate. If the leaves show any dust or noticeable residue, they can be gently washed under tap water. Otherwise, don't wash them. Allow them to remain on the plate until they dry, and then once dried, they can be packaged and submitted to the analytical laboratory. Here is an example of a foliar test report as it returns from the analytical laboratory. There are 3 columns. One column is the content of the foliar test, the actual nutrient content expressed as percentage in the case of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and sulfur, or in parts per million in the case of iron, manganese, boron, copper, zinc, and molybdenum. The actual content is then compared to the sufficiency range. The sufficiency range is considered to be the optimum level of leaf nutrient content. And this has been arrived at through exhaustive research. And then once the comparison is made, then a rating is given as far as low, optimum, or high. And for example, if we look at nitrogen, this particular sample had a content of 1.7% compared to a sufficiency range of 1.7 to 2.5%. Nitrogen in this sample would be considered to be optimum. In the case of potassium, the sample had a content of 0.58%, and the sufficiency range of 1.25 to 2.2% indicates that in the case of potassium, it is in a low situation in this particular foliar sample. The actual contents as compared to the sufficiency ranges can help reveal which nutrients may be in short supply and can also be used to adjust a fertility management program to address any perceived shortages of nutrients. Foliar testing is also a useful way to help diagnose nutritional problems in fruit crops. As we see in this picture here, blueberry nutrient deficiencies can look like various types of foliar symptoms, and it can be difficult from just a visual analysis to determine what the underlying cause is. But in the case of a foliar test, this can help us diagnose the problem. In this case, twinned foliar tests are collected. One sample includes healthy foliage. The other sample includes the foliage that is exhibiting the nutrient deficiency symptoms. The results of the foliar test are then compared. And if differences are seen in the relative amounts of particular nutrients, this can be an indication that these nutrients are contributing to the visual symptoms.
Okay. Do we have any questions at this point on foliar sampling?
No questions right now.
All right. Are we back to the presentation? Anna, are we back to the presentation?
You're back.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Now let's talk about pruning. And it's been my experience with pruning that, if you try to demonstrate pruning with slides, it's ineffectual. And so, as I mentioned at the beginning, a colleague of mine from the University of Illinois and I put together this video to illustrate pruning blueberries. And again, it's a little bit long. It's about, I think 18 minutes long, but it does a reasonable job of talking about pruning and the different ages of shoots and how to prune a blueberry. So let's take a look at this video. And I'm going to apologize. I have to bring up the video here. Okay, Anna, can we see this video now?
You can see it, yep.
Okay. Can't believe I'm being this successful at jumping around on Zoom. But at any rate, this is the video that I mentioned.
I'm Patrick Byers, horticulture field specialist with the University of Missouri Extension. Today, we're here at the blueberry patch in southwest Missouri.
And I'm Elizabeth Wally, University of Illinois Extension. And today, Pat and I are going to talk about pruning blueberries. So Pat, let's talk about the anatomy of a blueberry bush and how it pertains to pruning.
Sure. So once a bush reaches this age, there's a mixture of shoots of different ages. And for a fruitful plant, you need roughly the same number of shoots that are 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, and 5 years old. And you can get a feel for how old a shoot is by looking at its appearance. The youngest shoots, the bark is very smooth. It's typically a light color. As the shoots age, they develop a gray, scaly bark. And of course, the oldest shoots are the ones largest diameter, and they definitely have a gray, scaly appearance. Now, of course, another thing to think about is fruitfulness on shoots of various ages.
And on blueberries, in pruning, it's really important to know where the fruit buds are. And on blueberry bushes, they tend to be on the towards the terminal ends of the main shoots or even the laterals as well. And so when you do look at shoots, you can see that on the tip, the little fattened, rounded buds are going to be your fruitful or floral buds. And then the more pointy, more narrow buds that are further down, closer to the base of the laterals or the main branch are the vegetative buds on there. So when you're pruning, you don't want to be taking off your tips, or you're taking off your crop as well.
It's true. And as you look at the age of a shoot, you can get a feel, too, by how much it's branched at the top. So if we were to look at this older shoot right here, lots of branches. We do have flowery buds, but they tend to be fairly small. Whereas a younger shoot, let's see, here's a good example. It, too, is branched, but not to that degree. And we have nice, productive, large flowery buds on the tips of these shoots.
So, Pat, it kind of sounds like that you're alluding that maybe some of these older branches aren't as fruitful.
That's certainly true. And research and growers' experience has demonstrated that the most productive shoots on a blueberry bush, again, are those shoots that are 2 to 5 years old. And once a shoot gets beyond 5 years of age, it actually becomes a drain on the bush. And it's time to prune that shoot out.
Well, taking some of that, I think maybe we're going to move into our next step and actually start talking about some of those steps on how to avoid taking your crop off and also invigorate your plant so that it stays productive for many years.
So looking at this plant, Elizabeth, I see a lot of shoots. It just looks very dense to me, and I'm curious, when we're done pruning, it's not going to look like this. What are the benefits of pruning?
Well, it kind of goes back, the first one goes back to what you said about as the canes age, they become less productive and actually become a drain on the plant. So one of the benefits of pruning is to remove some of those older canes, which not only takes them out and takes the drain off the plant, but also it stimulates the growth of new canes, which are going to be much more productive. And so one of the other goals that we were working for is to actually open up the plant for sunlight penetration. And so we always want to have good sunlight for the development of flower buds and vegetative buds, and stimulating down to the crown these new growth of canes. But one of the things that we need to really talk about is the benefits that you have in terms of IPM. We're looking at this plant right now without its leaves on, and you know that if you were doing pesticide applications, you'd probably get pretty good coverage. But imagine this plant with its leaves on in season when you're trying to do some treatments for like SWD. We know that we need to have some really good coverage for that particular pest.
Yeah, and remember when we talk about integrated pest management and the strategies that are available for a farmer to manage problems, you actually have to develop a plant that is conducive for IPM strategies. And as you said, opening up the structure is huge. It helps encourage rapid drying of the shoots and foliage and fruit after a rain or dew, which is definitely helpful from the standpoint of disease management. It opens up the structure so we have better air movement from the standpoint of insect issues. Spotted-winged Drosophila is always more of a problem on dense plants. And then, as you said, if we choose to use pesticide applications, having a good open structure enables us as farmers to get good coverage of the foliage, the developing fruit, and in fact the entire plant.
So, Pat, we've kind of talked about, using pruning to keep your production up and also to keep a healthy plant and to aid in your IPM practices. Let's kind of talk about next what we actually remove. We're out here in the dormant season, and that would suggest when the best time to prune might be during the dormant season.
It's true, Elizabeth. And much of the pruning we do with blueberries is a dormant season operation. We can clearly see the structure of the bush. We can see which shoots need to stay and which shoots need to go. We can identify broken shoots easily, and we can also identify disease shoots. So in general, much of our pruning is done during the dormant season, but of course there's better days than other days during the dormant season. And with blueberries, we typically try to do most of our pruning after the coldest part of the winter is past. So, sometime from, say, the 1st of February on. But if you've got a lot of bushes to prune, you have to back up from that date so that you can get the job done. And so you can start pruning earlier than that, but try to choose days that are dry days. Try to choose days where it's going to be dry for at least a day after you're finished pruning, and try to choose cold days as well. And always prune your older bushes before you prune your younger bushes.
That brings to mind one follow-up question on that. Let's say, like where we're at, there's a lot of blueberry bushes to prune, and you don't think that you're going to get them all pruned if you start in February. What are some of the disadvantages or possible drawbacks to pruning really early in the dormant season?
Well, if you prune too early, and we get warm periods of time, you can actually set up a situation where the plants begin to lose some hardiness, and that can have negative effects if it gets cold again after that warm spell. So again, try to wait as long as you can before you prune. Now, obviously, you've got to get pruning done before you get much in the way of bud swell, because as you prune, you can possibly damage those swelling, developing flower buds, and you don't want to do that. So a good way to look at it is, figure out roughly how long it's going to take, assuming the weather's perfect, back up that much, and then give yourself at least an extra week beyond that for days where you can't get out and prune, and that's when you start pruning. Well, to do a good job of pruning, of course, you need the right tools, Elizabeth. Why don't you walk us through what we need to actually do the job of pruning?
Well, I think the first thing to understand and accept is that everyone has a personal preference for what their favorite pruning tool is. But there are some general rules. The larger the cut, the more steps up you have in the type of power that you're using. So for the smallest cuts, and I usually say those are, around no more than 1 inch diameter, or about, the distance of my index finger on there. And so those are good for hand pruners. And there are some things that you want to consider when you're purchasing your hand pruner, and one of them is how it fits your hand. And so I've got pruners here, and Pat has a set, and his are large, and let me lock these up so we can hold them, and mine are small. And so, when you're handling pruners, you want to open them up and put them in your hand, and you should be able to grasp the handles without stressing your hand. And so that's one of the ways to reduce repetitive action injury on your hand, is to not have a constant tension on your hand with small cuts. Now, some of the other, beyond the basic hand pruner that you can consider, this set of pruners has a rolling handle. And so when you actually use them, as you squeeze them, the handle rolls with your fingers, again, reducing stress on your hand. One of the other options that I like are what we call offset pruners. And so if you look at these are quite a bit offset. And so when you hand these, open these up and use them, your wrist is more of a straight angle, so that you have that less of that cocking on your wrist. So again, reducing more of that ergonomic flow on your pruners. So one of the other things that you might run across are the different types of hand pruners. And so the ones that we recommend are actually called bypass pruners. And they're called bypass because the two cutting blades actually pass each other. And you sharpen these, so that you have a good clean cut. And these are the ones that we actually recommend. Why? And the recommendation is over what we call these anvil pruners. And again, need to be incredibly sharp, but this actually does not, the blades don't cross, they actually come together. And so if you don't have an incredibly sharp blade, you can actually have crushing injury to where you've made a cut. So if you're keeping them incredibly sharp, good. But the bypass in general will give you a cleaner cut in pruning, so we prefer those.
What about our colleagues who are lefties?
They thought of that. So if you're lefty, don't buy righties. So
good.
pruners are definitely rated as to whether they're for left-handers or right-handers.
Now, what about larger cuts? As we're pruning blueberries, obviously we're going to be taking out some large canes. What do we need for larger
Definitely. Cuts? As I mentioned, the hand pruners are usually up to 1 inch, but beyond that, it's just really stressful on your hand. And so that's when you're going to step up to something like a lopper. And so you're holding one of the smaller size loppers that you can use. If you need a little more reach, these usually will go all the way up to like these 6-inch loppers that are probably good up to maybe 3-inch cuts with ease. And there are some of them that have, hinges in them to actually give you a little more power to them, but these just standard ones usually allow you up to a 3-inch cut.
Now, occasionally we need to make really big cuts. What are we going to use for that?
Well, you can use your own manpower, and you can use something like a pruning saw. Those come in folding saws or regular, tree saws that you can use, and those are intended, to cut wood specifically for pruning. But if you have a lot of pruning, you do actually have pneumatics that either can be on belt packs that you wear around your waist, or it can run off of a generator or off the power of your tractor as well. So all of that is available to make some of those bigger cuts.
Now, another thing to think about, pruning, of course, is a wounding process by its nature. And you want to make sure that the tools that you use to do that wounding process are clean. So it's a good practice to make sure that your tools are clean at the beginning of the day and also at intervals during the day. So in general, starting off in the morning with pruning, make sure you clean your tools. They may need to be scrubbed vigorously. You can use something like this towel to wipe plant debris off. That's the first step. Once they're clean, then they should be sanitized. And using a material like this chlorine bleach can do that job. About a 10% bleach solution is a good solution for disinfecting pruners. You can also use full-strength rubbing alcohol or various other types of sanitizers. Now, if your pruning is actually targeting diseased plant parts, part of IPM, of course, is making sure you don't spread diseases unwittingly, and you can certainly do that on your pruning tools. And it's a good practice to disinfect even more frequently if you're removing diseased or dead parts of the plant. Well, so looking at this bush, it has been pruned in the past, and I would say a reasonable job has been done with it. And remembering that the ideal is roughly the same number of shoots that are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. Anything 5 years or older is a candidate for removal. So on a well-pruned, healthy bush like this, I usually will walk up to it and think about removing probably 4 or 5 of the oldest shoots.
Okay.
And again, you can recognize those old shoots by the rough, scaly gray bark on them, and also by the diameter of the shoots themselves. So if we look at this bush here, a good candidate for removal would be this shoot right here. We'll go ahead and take it out. We try to cut as close as we can to the ground. So there's one to remove.
Wow, that took off an awful lot of flower buds, Pat.
Well, yes, it did. And I try not to look up while I'm doing these shoots, these cutting of these shoots. But again, the bush will benefit from this aggressive pruning. And recognize that even though we are removing flower buds when we take off these old shoots, we're removing the less productive flower buds. And we're saving the part of the plant that has the higher quality buds on it. So that's two. Let's see. Let's take out this one here. There's three. Here's a large shoot right here. And then here's another large shoot in the center. You can see that our pile of brush is beginning to grow, but that's what you have to do.
You've just taken out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and look how different the bush already looks.
Just by those shoots. And I think as we assess what we've done, there may be 1 or 2 more shoots that we could take out as well. But this gives you a feel for the starting point on pruning a mature blueberry bush.
We've shown how removal of the oldest canes are going to really up the productivity, and that kind of seems like that if you're pressed for time, that might be the most important pruning step.
Yeah, I really couldn't agree more, Elizabeth. And you know, especially on a farm, there's always something to be done, right? And especially if the weather's not cooperating with it, it is important to get those large, older shoots out. And once you've done that, you've opened up structure. At that point, you've already made some selection for the best quality flower buds, the ones that remain. And if you don't get anything else done, at least try to get that done.
But if you do want to really, do some management of the crop, it seems like maybe we should talk about some of the precision pruning that can be done in blueberries.
Yeah, so detail pruning is important, and you definitely want to try to get that done. Now, one of the benefits of detail pruning is you can actually position the crop where it's most efficient from the standpoint of harvest and also from the standpoint of management for problems like spotted-winged Drosophila. Most pickers, for example, are very happy if the blueberries are between their knees and their chins. That's an easy area in which to pick. And we can actually position the crop in that part of the fruiting zone by removing the shoots at the base. We really don't need those shoots. No one wants to get down on their hands and knees to pick blueberries. Also keep in mind the fruit that's down low will be in the part of the bush where there's not as good air movement, even though we've opened structure, and you won't do as good a job of protecting that fruit with your pesticide sprays. So there's no point in keeping that area if you don't need to. And so detail pruning is coming out and removing those low shoots, those inner shoots that you really don't need.
And I think we should point out that our bushes that we're actually doing the demonstration on are fairly upright. There are some cultivars that are more spreading nature, and this is even more important to try and get that growth more in an upright position as well.
Agreed. Well, should we do some detail pruning on this plant?
Sounds good.
Okay. Now, you can do a certain amount of this with your hand pruners. And again, we're thinking about where that crop is going to lay, and we're going to selectively remove these shoots in the center part of the bush that are low growing, that we really don't want cropped that low. This process further opens up the interior structure of the bush as well. So again, you can see the process here. We're clearing out all of these lower shoots that are crowning up the center. We're removing the low-lying crop that is not very efficient to harvest or manage. And we'll work our way around the bush and get all of this material out of the way. But you can see the effect here of removing those lower shoots. Okay, there we are.
So, Pat, they just saw a sped up version of you removing all the twiggy growth that was down the low, and it's just amazing how much you've given them 2 steps. Take out the 5, 6 of the oldest cane. That really opened it up, and in less than 5 minutes, you took out all the twiggy undergrowth, and that's really opened up the plant now. Now, you said from the knees to the chin, so we're definitely above my chin. So what do we do about bushes that are starting to get really tall? These aren't really that tall for pickers, but some bushes will. What do we do about bushes that are starting to get some height on them?
Yeah, so some cultivars just, again, are more naturally upright growing and are more vigorous than what we see here in this planting. If they start to get too tall, you can actually halt that upward growth by heading back cuts on new shoots. And typically the first year that a blueberry shoot grows, it's not going to be branched. There may be 1 or 2 branches, but frequently they're unbranched shoots. When they reach the height at which you want them to stay, so for most of us that's going to be somewhere around 5 feet, we can cut the tip off. And that will cause it to branch down below that point. It won't grow any taller, but it will develop its bearing area then, again, in that zone that we want, right around our chins. And so that's helpful. Something else that we can take a look at too, and again, these bushes are in reasonable vigor. Occasionally with lower vigor bushes, we don't have as many new shoots, and we end up having these old shoots with very dense twiggy type growth, and it can be beneficial to come in and actually thin those little pieces out. And you can actually do that by just snapping them with your fingers. Again, that's sort of taking detail pruning to the nth degree, and most of us don't have enough time to do that, but that can be done as well with lower vigor bushes. Well, we finished pruning that bush, and we've got a pile of brush, and if you take this pile and multiply it by all the thousands of bushes in this planting, that's going to be a lot of brush. What do we do with this brush, Elizabeth?
Well, we need to do something, or it's going to interfere with operations, that's for sure. And so the most common methods is that you can run a flail mower or some other operation that chops it up so that it's not a tripping hazard or in your way when you're doing other operations. Another method is to actually pull it from the planting completely and take it to a site where it can be burned. And that's probably a really important option if you have disease within the planting
part
itself.
of your IPM strategy.
Yeah, part of your IPM strategy on that. And I think that we were talking earlier that when you are doing pruning, you actually try to make a conscientious decision to orient them and kind of get them centered in the middle of the aisleway. And I think that's really important, for later on. You don't want to have to come back and double duty,
exactly.
Pulling it back together just so that you can run a mower over the top of it or pick it up and put it on a wagon to take it away. So, Pat, we're here, and I want to discuss the situations that would prompt you to really prune hard. on a blueberry bush?
Well, there can be situations, for example, if there's a patch that has been abandoned for a period of time and your goal is to bring it back into production, there can be a situation where you have cultivars that just don't throw lots of new shoots. On occasion, in those situations, sometimes the best approach is to be pretty extreme in your pruning. And in fact, some cases, the best approach is to cut the plant back to the ground to reinvigorate it. Remember, the pruning, if done properly, is an invigorating process. And so this bush is a good example. We look at this bush, we see a number of older shoots, but we just don't see a lot of new, young, vigorous shoots on this bush. So this bush would be a candidate for cutting back.
Okay, that kind of seems a little bit of a risky proposition. Does it always work?
Well, there's few things in life that are 100%, and it's been my experience with blueberries that if the bush is otherwise healthy and it's just suffering from low vigor, that if you remove some of the things that are reducing vigor and you do this renewal pruning, you can actually regrow a healthy, vigorous bush. Doesn't happen all the time, but most of the time that'll be the case.
I'm with you. When you grow blueberries for commercial production, you need a bush that's going to be productive, and that's usually what triggers me coming in to make a more aggressive pruning on them, is when I have a bush that is just not performing, and I'm to the stage of I really don't have anything to lose.
That's true. That's true. If you look at this bush here, yes, there would be a few berries, but there's no young shoots. There's no young flower buds. Again, remember that the best flower buds are on those shoots that are 2, 3, 4 years old, and there's really very little shoot growth that's that age in this bush. Well, we're now in a part of the planting with younger plants, and of course the pruning approach is different with young plants.
Yeah, Pat, young plants have the benefit that they don't need a whole lot of pruning compared to one that's 5 years old or older. And so most of the canes are very young, don't need any removal at that, like we saw in some of the mature bushes. So what you're really targeting is removing any of that low, scraggly growth that just is not going to be productive. And you'll see that some of the other things that you can do are heading cuts, and that is different from a thinning cut in that you cut back to a side bud to stiffen the branch up and to promote laterals like we see here on these particular bushes. One of the other features that's not necessarily pruning, but it is removal of plant material, is the bloom on a young plant. And so I'm going to say for sure that you're going to remove the first 2 years bloom after planting. So that's not 2-year-old plants, so that doesn't get you confused as to whether you got 1-year-old, 2-year-old, or 3-year-old plants put in the ground. It's 2 years after planting that you'll remove. And so once they get to, this height or so, they're probably good to go to carry a crop. And you can see flower buds on this, and so wouldn't recommend removal of the flower buds on a plant this size. So this will probably be the first year this plant's going to come into cropping.
Yeah, so for the first couple years, grow the bush. Then after that, grow the bush and the crop.
There you go.
Okay. Do we have any questions at this point on pruning?
No questions right now.
Okay, are we back to the presentation?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, now let's talk a bit about some of the problems that can show up with blueberries. And as I mentioned at the beginning, there can be some challenges to growing blueberries in Missouri. And over the years, we've gotten a pretty good handle on what these challenges are. But even so, oftentimes it's helpful if there is a problem noted in the blueberry planting to bring in a specialist who can look at it with an educated eye and help come up with a solution. Blueberries are tricky. And I remember a diagnostician telling me once that figuring out what's wrong with a blueberry is a bit like a Sherlock Holmes novel, in that you start eliminating possibilities and then whatever's left, however improbable, must be right. And perhaps there's some truth in that. But diagnosing problems on blueberries can sometimes be challenging. So let's talk a bit about soil pH. If there's an issue with the soil pH, the The clues that you're having problems are, first of all, weak plants, but most importantly, chlorotic leaves. Notice the color on these leaves. They're light in color and they have dark veins. That's a clear sign of iron deficiency. And iron deficiency is the result of a soil pH that is too high. And so how do we manage soil pH? Well, first of all, we have to monitor it frequently, as I mentioned earlier. Good practice to test your soil pH each year. And then cultural strategies, applying nutrients to the leaves of the blueberry plant is helpful. Selecting acidic forms of nitrogen is very helpful. And then applying materials to the soil, such as iron, can be helpful as well. But the bottom line is we should be correcting the soil pH. And this may mean the addition of additional sulfur to the soil around the blueberry plants at intervals over the life of the planting. Disease management. We do have some diseases that can be an issue in Missouri. The most commonly noted ones are stem blight, Phomopsis stem canker, anthracnose, and five-top thoroughbred rot. On occasion, we've seen other diseases, but these first four are the most common. Now, how do we manage diseases in Missouri? Well, first of all, we want to plant on raised ridges or berms, and by doing so, we provide a portion of the soil profile that is well drained. And particularly the disease phytophthora that I just mentioned is much more of an issue on poorly drained soils. And in fact, many plantings avoid that problem entirely by growing, by having the bushes growing on berms. So again, this can be a very helpful IPM strategy for managing phytophthora. We can also remove damaged or diseased wood. Here we see anthracnose and stem blight. In both cases, it's an important aspect of IPM to eliminate these parts of the plant, prune them out, and then disinfect your pruners as you make these cuts. The diseased plant parts should be removed from the planting. Don't leave them laying around on the ground around bushes. Other ways to manage diseases, we can use fungicides as indicated. We want to be sure that we purchase good quality plants to start a planting off with. Whenever possible, source and purchase virus-tested plants. That way we don't unwittingly bring viruses into a new blueberry field. Again, remember that we should disinfect pruners as we make cuts to remove diseased plant parts. Insect management. An important insect pest in Missouri is the spotted wing Drosophila. You can see on the lower picture, we can see 3 larvae of spotted wing Drosophila. Actually, we see 2 larvae in a pupal case. This is a fruit fly. It attacks blueberries as they begin to ripen. Very important practice to monitor populations with traps and then to use labeled insecticides to manage spotted wing Drosophila as harvest approaches. It's also helpful to plant early ripening blueberries. Spotted wing Drosophila becomes a problem as the populations build in July. And those blueberries that ripen in June typically have fewer issues with spotted wing Drosophila. But again, very important to monitor populations because every year is different. Birds can be a challenge for blueberry farmers. 2 basic ways to address birds, and that's to scare them away or to exclude them. So let's take a look first at scare tactics. All of these have been used with varying degrees of success here in Missouri: owl decoys, kite-type decoys, and the scare eye balloon. Notice that in that picture with the scare eye balloon, there's also a little speaker up near it, and that is what's called an avalarm, which is an audio scare tactic. The farmer plays a recorded bird distress call over the avalarm, and this tends to disorient birds and can actually keep birds from damaging the plants. Here in a moment, we're going to be seeing a video on blueberry ripeness, but you'll hear in the background the avalarm. It's kind of a unpleasant squawking sound, and it does tend to scare birds away. Netting is the most widely used way of excluding birds from plantings. And netting can be used on a large scale. There is oftentimes, though, you have to consider the cost of the netting and oftentimes the support system. As we see in this planting, the netting is suspended above the plants. Scare tactics work, but netting really works. So if you're willing to go to the effort and the expense to install it, you will be able to protect the majority of the crop. Keep in mind that without some bird management strategy, you can expect at least a 25% loss of berries, and sometimes higher. Okay, do we have any questions at this point, Anna?
No questions right now.
Okay, let's talk about blueberry harvest. Here in Missouri, blueberry harvest is in June and July. Typically in southern Missouri, harvest begins about June 10th, and then of course a little bit later as you move further north. And depending upon which cultivars you're growing, you can be harvesting blueberries for a 6 to 7 week period. A given cultivar will typically have a 2 to 3 week harvest period. The first week, you harvest the very largest initial berries. The second week is the majority of the harvest. And the third week is cleaning up what's left. So again, thinking about your cultivar selection, you can actually develop a harvest season that fits your needs based upon the cultivars that you select. Fruit should be harvested when fully colored. And if we look at these 3 pictures here, notice that cluster, we frequently will have berries of different levels of ripeness within a cluster. And it's important to harvest blueberries at the proper stage because blueberry fruit quality does not improve after harvest. Basically, the quality at harvest is the quality that you then have from that point on. So very important to harvest blueberries when they're fully ripe. And a fully ripe blueberry is blue from the calyx end to the stem end. So let's take a look at a quick video. In this video, Bob Hershey, who is a blueberry farmer in eastern Missouri, briefly talks about how to select a good blueberry. And as I mentioned, if you want to hear the alarm, you can hear it screeching in the background. So let's take a look at this video.
Patrick, we have a question.
Now, what is the question?
It says, the untreated soil in my soon-to-be orchard tested as naturally good for blueberries based on pH and fertility. I know I need to test the soil yearly, but do I need to use mulch and fertilizer that is acidic, or would that risk going overboard?
No, I don't believe it risks going overboard. And it is important that you monitor soil pH on an annual basis. But in most cases, when you irrigate blueberries, you're using high pH water. And many soils tend to overcome they have what's called buffering capacity. They tend to overcome the changes that you made initially. So using an acid-forming fertilizer and acidifying water in some cases should be an on part of managing your blueberries because it helps maintain the acidic soil pH.
Thank you. That's the only question right now.
Okay, very good. Okay, let's take a look at the video. Okay, can we see this video?
We're having some trouble hearing you, Patrick.
Okay, can we see the video at this point?
Yes.
Okay. And I'll try to speak louder.
When you're picking blueberries, you want to get your hands underneath, your thumb on the stem, and just roll. They'll come off real easy in your hand without any stems on that way. If you accidentally get a berry that's got a purple backside, like this one right here, you don't want that berry. Now, you can't help but getting a few of those, but it's best just to drop them on the ground. If you don't believe it, taste one. And as you put them in your bucket, you look in your bucket. If you see a green berry or a berry with a purple backside, pick it out and throw it away. We don't want you taking those home. A lot of the new growers that just start out always want to leave people start picking berries just as soon as they start turning blue. They're not ripe yet. There's only one way to tell if a berry is ripe, even when it's blue, is to taste it. And that is the only way, other than going to a scientific experiment and figure how much bricks is in the berries.
Okay, did everyone hear that alarm screeching in the background?
I did.
Okay, let's go back to the presentation. Okay, are we back at the presentation now, Anna?
Yes.
Okay, now as far as harvesting blueberries, when they're ripe, of course, it's time to harvest. Typically, you'll be harvesting blueberries at about 5 to 7 day intervals. In a warm year, more frequently in a more typical year, about every 7 days. Harvest before the heat of the day. So in general, try to get your blueberries harvested before 10 o'clock. The fruit should be cooled as soon as possible and stored under refrigeration. Every hour that you delay in cooling berries after harvest, you lose a day of storage. So get those berries cooled as soon as possible. You can hold berries under a cold storage for at least 5 to 7 days. And the ideal temperature for maintaining blueberries in cold storage is about 32 to 35 degrees. And you want to hold them at high humidity, somewhere between 85 to 95% humidity. They can be enjoyed as fresh fruit, or they can be frozen for longer term storage. Lots of opportunities for blueberry value added. Many farmers, as they begin growing and marketing blueberries, will start out marketing fresh berries. And then if they have excess crop, they'll freeze those berries for sales later. And again, an excellent way to market blueberries. You can also freeze dry blueberries and put them into a shelf-stable form. And freeze-dried blueberries are absolutely delicious. You can also make a number of processed products from blueberries jams, blueberry jelly, blueberry juices, blueberry wines, various combinations of blueberries and other fruits. You can make beverages, as I mentioned, wine and kombucha can be made from blueberries. And then there are natural for baked products, things such as blueberry muffins, blueberry pies, or blueberry cobblers. This is my friend Ernie Boner, who has made a specialty out of blueberries. And I don't know if you can see it on his sign there, but he has several signature products. He makes a muffin that is just out of this world, absolutely delicious. He calls it a thunder muffin. He makes a blueberry cinnamon roll, which is just equally delicious. He makes blueberry smoothies. He makes blueberry cobblers, and then he makes a wide range of processed blueberry products. Some quick comments on blueberry produce food safety. Keep in mind that blueberries are a covered crop under the Food Safety Modernization Act produce safety rule. And if you're growing and marketing blueberries, you want to be aware of this. Some special considerations for pick your own. This is a common way that blueberries are marketed. Make sure that you have hand washing and bathroom facilities available at your farm. Make sure that you use clean picking containers. As we see in this picture here, this is a common way the blueberries are handled in a pick your own setting, with a 1 gallon bucket with a plastic bag liner. And then the blueberries are picked into the bucket, and then the bag is lifted out, a twist tie is put on it, and the bag of berries is sent home with the customer. Make sure that the bags are single use and clean. Make sure that the buckets are cleaned as necessary. So again, this can be an excellent way to minimize any produce food safety risks from the standpoint of harvest containers.
Patrick, we have another question.
Yes.
That says, I'm seeing a lot of splitting on my berries this year. Any idea of the cause?
The splitting on blueberries is frequently the result of excess rain, or it can be the result of irregular rainfall. Blueberries size up and develop best if you have consistent soil moisture. When we get a heavy rain, the fruit can actually, or the plants can actually take up water so quickly that the berries can't accommodate the added water that enters the berry. The skin's just not elastic enough, and the result is a split berry. But we more frequently see splitting when we have dry periods followed by heavy rains. And again, the bush takes up water so quickly that the berries can't accommodate the added moisture. So that's likely the cause of the splitting on the berries. Do we have any other questions at this point?
That's the only one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anna. Okay, just some quick thoughts on blueberry business planning. Keep in mind that blueberries are a long-term crop. The plants that you plant today will still be productive if they're well cared for in 20 years. So they can be a long-term profit center on a specialty crop farm. They are capital intensive to establish. Typically, the establishment costs for blueberries are somewhere between $5,000 to $8,000 per acre. And the payback period is extended. Typically, you're not going to see payback on the initial investment for 4 to 5 years, sometimes 6 years. So all of these things have to be kept in mind when you develop your business plan. And that business plan is essential for success with blueberries. So if you have any questions about developing a business plan, please reach out. We have a number of resources available through University of Missouri to help you understand the realities of the business aspects of establishing and marketing blueberries. There are some excellent budget tools available for farmers considering blueberry production, and they're available at this website. I'm not going to go to this site and spend a lot of time, but I will mention that these are extremely useful tools from the standpoint of developing that blueberry business plan. Blueberries are so beautiful, and it's not surprising that we're seeing more and more use of blueberries in edible landscaping. But again, here's my promo shot for blueberries. They're lovely when they blossom in the spring. Of course, berry harvest right now is an exciting time. Lovely fall color on blueberry plants in the autumn. And even during the winter, they're an attractive plant. So some resources to share with you at the end of our workshop today. Periodically, University of Missouri Extension hosts the Missouri Blueberry School. We'll likely have a blueberry school in 2022, next year. Visit this website. We have the presentations from past blueberry schools here, and there's a wealth of information on all aspects of blueberry production at the Missouri Blueberry School website. The publication Growing Blueberries in Missouri, developed by the Missouri State Fruit Experiment Station, is very helpful. The Midwest Fruit Pest Management Guide, which is an online interactive guide for fruit growers, has a section on blueberry pest management. And then the Midwest Blueberry Production Guide. This is a guide put together through the cooperative efforts of fruit specialists across the Midwest. And this too is available as a free downloadable PDF. So at this point, this brings us to the end of the workshop. Are there any questions before we end our workshop this evening? Any questions at all related to blueberries? And I like this shot because it shows you can even develop bonsai out of blueberries. Any questions?
No questions right now. Thank you so much, Patrick. This was so informative and so helpful. Thank you for being here tonight.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Let me bring the video back up. Again, we have time for questions if anyone would like to enter questions into the Q&A.
We have one. Let's take a look. The question is, what is the best way to add sulfur to established soil?
The best way to add sulfur to an established soil is when it's time to replenish the mulch, spread the sulfur first, scratch it into what's left of the original mulch, and then mulch over the top. It takes longer for the pH effect to be seen from a surface application of sulfur than initially when you were able to work it into the soil. But obviously you can't work it into the soil if the blueberries are in place. So again, scattering the sulfur around the plants is really the only option in an existing blueberry planting. But again, very important long-term aspect of managing blueberries.
All right, no questions right now. Might wait just one more second. While we're waiting, once this call ends, there will be a pop-up for a survey, a post-workshop survey. If you could take a few minutes to fill that out, we would really appreciate that. Springfield Community Gardens uses that in our reporting to the USDA and also helps us provide meaningful workshops to all of you in the future. And it looks, okay, yep. And I have also put this survey form in the chat, as well as if you're interested in reviewing this workshop later, it'll be on the Springfield Community Gardens YouTube channel and our agriculture workshop playlist. So I put that link as well as our other social medias. And Patrick's information is in the chat as well. Okay, it doesn't look like we have any other questions.
Well, excellent. I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. And if questions come up in the future, please feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to visit with you about blueberries, and particularly if you're considering commercial scale production.
Okay, thanks a lot, Patrick. Have a good night.
Thank you, Anna.